Quai Network itself is a new layer 1 blockchain.
That's Alan, the co-founder of Quai Network. Alan had some interesting choice of words about Solana.
We see Solana being competitive in payments, although they can't necessarily reach that global scale because I think from an infrastructure standpoint, they don't have the resiliency required.
And about Bitcoin.
So when you look at how Bitcoin today is being adopted, it's trying to fit a square peg in a round hole.
I had to push back.
Do you think people really care at this point?
Hey everyone, welcome back to the show. This was quite the interview with Alan of Quai Network. We touched on Solana, Bitcoin, and of course, Quai Network. Please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel. It will help support my work so that I can continue to bring interesting content to your fingertips. Enjoy the first part of my interview with Alan of Quai Network.
Thanks for having me. Excited to dive into my background. As you said, CEO of Dominant Strategies and co-founder of Quai Network. Quai Network itself is a new layer 1 blockchain that I'm sure we'll dive into a lot of technical details and different differentiators for what we're building. And ultimately, glad to be on the podcast and appreciate you having me.
Absolutely. You being a founder and really thinking about cutting edge technology, where do you think we are as an industry when it comes to infrastructure in Web3? Some of these other chains that you're seeing, what's happening around Solana and its comeback? I mean, what are you thinking in terms of the narratives here, this next bull cycle?
Yeah, so I've been around since 2015, and I was actually in college around kind of when I got into Bitcoin and Ethereum and didn't really have a ton of money to be buying crypto. So I spent most of my time learning and getting into the underlying details and technology. And to see it evolve from where it's come from 2015, 2016, I remember being in an internship at a fintech company as a banking, sort of more brick and mortar type banking company in the e-commerce space. And they're like, we need to stay away from all this crypto stuff. We don't want to use Ethereum for payments. We don't want to use these new decentralized technologies. And just to see that infrastructure grow to where it is today, where people are actually comfortable accepting payment in crypto, or even more so using it purely in a DeFi setting in a distributed and global way, has become extremely exciting. You touched on Solana some, and having a competitive layer 1 to Solana, I think is a fun debate because they attempt to also move into this payments area of doing things that are sort of low latency, high frequency, and of sort of more cheap and affordable value that other layer 1s can't accomplish. And we see Solana being competitive in payments, although they can't necessarily reach that global scale because I think from an infrastructure standpoint, they don't have the resiliency required. So as you've seen with a lot of the surge traffic on Solana, if something is hyped like the Jupiter airdrop, then the network might go down or become congested, and it leads to pretty bad user experience. So with Quai, we'd like to see how we can build up the right infrastructure to remain decentralized in a scalable way and handle a lot of that surge sort of onset that's going to come as we bring in the next billion users into DeFi and Web3.
You mentioned the Solana crashes, which I think I lost count. There's maybe 11, 12 of them that happened over the course of the last couple of years. Do you think people really care at this point?
Yeah, from my standpoint, I think it depends on the use case. And so if you're trading on Solana and you're doing meme coins and NFTs and all this fun, more degenerate things, you may not necessarily care because in the same way that you're putting your money at risk in that use case, you're also having that sort of priced in into, if this network goes down, I'm okay with not accessing my funds, and I'm okay with not being able to immediately reconcile to a different chain or to my bank account. I think when we talk about that infrastructure on the prior question in regards to payments and how that use case may not be as fitting for a global economy, is people want access to their funds. And that's why in our traditional infrastructure, you see platforms like Venmo or even like a WeChat Pay or an Alipay work out really well because that is more global infrastructure that is always online and always accessible. So I think for a blockchain and crypto to be scalable to that level of demand, we need to see that resilient platform that is also cheap, easy to use, and scalable for enough people. And yeah, I mean, again, when you talk about the outages, people come to expect it. I think now that it's more of a recurring thing, maybe it had a larger shock and awe earlier on, but now, you're seeing the network evolve some, you're seeing it improve, but again, I think it's more of a built-in thing.
You providing a competitor, as you called it, to Solana and other layer 1s. What are your thoughts about what's happening with, like, say, the Denkun upgrade, where Ethereum is going to scale, it's going to be faster, it's going to be cheaper. The layer 2s, which are already faster and cheaper, will become even more. Where do you fit in terms of your product and what you're providing? Where do you fit all that amongst all these other competitors?
Sure. So when you talk about that upgrade specifically, you're referring to the ability for Ethereum to now host extra data. So Ethereum as a programmable computer or a world computer or a state machine typically operates with set instructions. So the EVM can process these smart contracts in which those typically result to a certain outcome. But now with Denkun, they're adding more availability for just generic data to be published, almost like a Google Drive on Ethereum. And so when you look at how that data is published by layer twos, you're seeing most of that activity happen now on these layer twos. And so you get this fragmentation that occurs. And now the general trend in the industry is how do we get Ethereum aligned, and how do we all want the best for people that are interacting on Ethereum because we want to settle there. And the competitive area in which Quai Network steps in and saying, well, if we have an integrated layer one blockchain that has the ability to do some of that data publishing features, but ultimately we want to optimize that execution for those smart contracts and making that as cheap as possible and easy to use as possible, then we don't have that necessitation for those layer twos. And so we sort of remove some of that need to fragment the ecosystem because we can process that throughput that's required on a single chain or on a single network. And when you look at how Ethereum today, their problem is, okay, well, now we have these layer twos, this fragmentation. Which app chains do I use? Which layer twos do I use? Where is the value accruing? How does that go back to Ethereum? And is Ethereum the best place to really have that abstraction for that data publishing? And so even then, I think we still see competitors to Ethereum like Celestia or other newer sort of roll app type chains that are saying, hey, we're actually a better general purpose data availability layer compared to Ethereum. Use us instead. So I think Ethereum has a tough roadmap ahead to align that and create that right use case. I would say we're on the kind of other spectrum, kind of, again, closer to the Solana side of optimizing for that individual execution that actually occurs on the layer one itself, as opposed to delegating to layer twos.
You're saying that you're closer to Solana, but you are EVM compatible, if I'm not mistaken. Is that correct?
That is correct.
There's this debate, Rust versus Solidity, which one makes sense. And a lot of engineers say that Solidity is more of a business decision. It's not necessarily one that quote unquote makes sense from a technical perspective. What are your thoughts on that debate?
Sure. So as a programmer, I've been a programmer for most of my life. As you mentioned before, I was at Apple doing that and had the ability to experiment with a lot of different programming languages. And even in some of the earlier cycles in 2017, there were some smart contract languages that weren't even related to Solidity or Rust or Golang or these newer languages. So I've had the ability to see the trade-offs. And ultimately, the best way to determine which language is going to win is that developer ecosystem and the community and people that want to pick it up, and then the network effects from it. And so the EVM right now has a pretty good vendor lock-in because it's easy to it's easy to bootstrap a project. It's easy to fork a repository and migrate it from chain to chain. And these Rust or other more quote unquote efficient alternatives still don't have that yet. They don't have an easy way to move into the language. And Rust itself is actually a pretty difficult language to learn. It does have a more steep learning curve compared to something like Solidity. And so I think the Solidity ecosystem is able to become more broad and ubiquitous as opposed to more of a niche Rust-based approach. And then even then, blockchains have a requirement outside of the language for their exact understanding. And so the languages themselves are more of a blueprint to how to interact with the foundational layer, but there are still a lot of nuances that occur. And when you have that EVM hook into it, then you still have the ability to have that general understanding, as opposed to a Rust that might have 4 or 5 different flavors of Rust, depending if you're on Solana or Stylus or Cosmos. So at a high level, there's still a lot of nuance there for Rust-based chains. And the EVM, I think, provides a more smooth experience, given that it has a deeper integration to the blockchain itself.
The other business decision I imagine that you had to make was, and this is partly technical, but whether to go proof of stake, proof of work. Most EVM chains are proof of stake. Ethereum converted from a proof of work chain to proof of stake.
So we're fully work-based, and there's actually a lot of thought and process around why proof of work is a better mechanism. From our standpoint, we're innovating in this area that seems almost largely abandoned by the next hype cycles and next wave of projects. And I think it's because now it's almost like a revolution or like a pendulum swinging back on proof of work, because we've seen so many ways in which, especially from our team, that we can innovate in that area. And the main reason is actually in terms of distribution and decentralization, we see work-based consensus mechanisms being the most broadly accessible and resilient. And so when you talk about decentralization, and if that's the core ethos of going back to Bitcoin, early cyberpunks, early adopters of what we're actually trying to accomplish with crypto, as opposed to sort of LARPing and DeFi and NFTs and these more niche community use cases, we see the value that a work-based solution brings is the ability to actually go global and be broad and decentralized and robust and resilient to different actors in a way in which proof of stake could be co-opted. And from a technical level, there's a lot of further nuance just in regards to sort of the competitive edge to keep up with work-based mining, making sure you have to upgrade your hardware, making sure that you can earn those tokens as you mine them from an electricity input. So we see from our team being able to innovate in this area a big win, just because now we can compete kind of with like the next big thing that is work-based, and that's Bitcoin. And so we've seen, of course, some speculation. It's like, well, what happens to Bitcoin with tail emission and when the rewards go to zero and all these sort of things that happen at the edge that are to come for Bitcoin's future. And for us, we get a unique approach to actually solve that head on with our project.
Okay, so your proof of work. So now I'm thinking, now my comparison is drawing Quai to Bitcoin, to Kappa, to Kadena, all these other proof of work chains. Now, from a security perspective, I see the advantage over proof of stake. The security aspect, I think it's there. And also from a regulatory perspective, right? If I'm an investor and I'm thinking long term, and I'm hearing Gary Gensler talk about, these other chains and how this is a security, that is a security. If I'm trying to minimize my risk, perhaps maybe I am going to be more inclined to look at proof of work. Like you made a comparison with Bitcoin. There's a lot of development happening around Bitcoin now. You have applications being built on top. There's also a lot of investment interest, institutional interest in that aspect, the ordinals, and that's something that we haven't seen before in previous cycles. How do you feel like that is going to play out with what you guys are building at Quai?
Yeah, so when you look at how Bitcoin today is being adopted, it's trying to fit a square peg in a round hole. Bitcoin hasn't been designed to do these things, and now all these people are building these solutions around the novelty of Bitcoin itself. And so it's almost memed itself into the institutional DCA bid, which is we're just going to keep buying Bitcoin because Bitcoin's the best and it's never going to change. And these rules that are ossified into the protocol are okay for us, and they're okay for the next evolution of the monetary design. And we don't see from our side that working out due to intrinsic network difficulties, long-term economics of Bitcoin, the distribution of Bitcoin, the security model of miners today. And with Quai, we have the ability to take a fresh approach and say, we don't have to worry about all this legacy things that were shipped back in 2009. We can worry about how to create a fresh protocol and ensure that it does have a long-term roadmap that has all of these past 15 years of experience built into it. And so almost like a last mover advantage for Quai, really, of trying to find all of the right things. So we do pull, some stuff from the proof of stake world, and we do pull, a few things from Solana and these other chains and Bitcoin itself. So I think we have a unique edge there to really make a good whole unified product across the full layer, from the foundational layer up to the app layer. And then when we talk about Bitcoin itself and all the other things that are sort of accruing on it, again, I think Bitcoin itself is ossified. I don't think really there's going to be any major upgrades to it. The last one we saw was in 2017 with SegWit, and we haven't really seen any major changes to the core consensus and even to the long-term roadmap of Bitcoin. And I think that's one of the better things about it, because now there's no single person with enough influence to go in and make a major change, which is at some point what you do need in order to get broad adoption as a monetary platform. And so, I think that's sort of the evolution of blockchain and crypto is you launch a system, you have a little bit of time and a window to make it better. And then beyond that, it sort of ossifies itself and then makes itself extremely difficult to change. And that's what we want from Quai as well. And at some point, we need to be able to step back and let the network operate on its own and ensure that we don't have influence of the system. And as you said, with proof of work, given that you actually separate some of the owning of the token to the security and the technical implementation of the network, that's a really nice property that you don't get in proof of stake. So again, a lot more coverage there just in regards to like the future of Bitcoin and what that might look like. But that was a great question from your side.
Thanks for tuning in to the first part of my interview with Alan. Stay tuned for the second part. Hit the like button and subscribe to the channel on the way out. And I'll catch you in the next episode.